As I watched the sun setting just north of Death Valley, a small film crew was still hard at work inside this crater. There was plenty of running around and animated discussion about the fading light and lengthening shadows. Things weren't turning out as they had hoped. This documentary took shape over several years, functioning as a kind of diary, a collection of thoughts and interviews. My position was that of being in my mid-30s with a profession, but no career. My scripts remained unmade, my proposals remained as proposals. But I had my video camera, some savings, and my old films as a kind of archive. Surely there was something to discover about the 1990s. When asked why he wrote his books, Jack Kerouac would say that he believed in what he saw. When I arranged the trip to see my mother in the States, I thought that, along the way, I would surely find the ideal opening sequence, the dynamics of new technologies and retro imagery.
What comes around it goes around, it all comes back to you.
On my previous visit, some years earlier, America had been very inspiring, with its strong imagery of struggle and success, justice and injustice, its jazz, rhythm and blues, the broad landscapes of history and popular mythology. The best and worst of things. It was once the great hope for modernity in the 20th century, but now it seemed to me to have lost its imagination, to have fallen into repetition, a lack of new ideas. Perhaps I wasn't in the right frame of mind. I couldn't get inside contemporary America. Although I did keep some of my notes for later. Passing through Sydney, I felt something similar. I used to live and work here, and I probably will again. But it didn't move me, even though it's a place that's always trying hard. I finished my travels back in the wide streets, mountains and suburbs of my old hometown, Canberra.
Down in Canberra, ACT, it's a bourgeois town. I said it's a bourgeois town. Got the bourgeois blues, don't spread the blues all around.
This was the place for the documentary I wanted to make. I knew people, I knew the routines, and that was the point really. That intimacy, camera and subject.
Say it again. It's a little bit like a soapy, you keep waiting for something to happen, but it never does.
Yeah.
I moved to Goulburn, home of the brave, land of the free. Don't want to be mistreated by the bourgeoisie. It's a bourgeois town. Well, it's a bourgeois
It too was once a great hope for modernity, the 20th century garden city. Outside of being Australia's capital city, it hardly existed until the 50s and the post-war boom times. The presence of the embassies, their staff and children, made for a cosmopolitan population. And by the 70s, we officially had multiculturalism at our school, though the school magazine contained the other side of the story as well. The university was always a dominant influence, together with the presence of the government.
I moved to Goulburn.
A white-collar city for the most part, with no conspicuous wealth or heavy industry. Canberra hasn't avoided its share of low-income families and unemployment, more so in recent years.
I got the Canberra Blues.
I'm not actually a buster yet. I actually haven't put anything out yet.
It's a small city, but in the global village, everywhere seems smaller. The big picture, or the grand narratives, have been replaced by small stories. Millions of small stories.
I think in the 80s people looked to the 70s as a reference point and always thought, oh, that was when it was really good, you know, the punk movement and stuff like that.
The 70s are now getting the full retro treatment. The myth-making. It's becoming difficult to picture how life actually was. To think of all the things we didn't know.
Well, as a young boy, I was a country party member. Come from the country. Thought that Joby Elkie-Peterson was the God's gift to the world. I thought he couldn't do anything wrong. I thought he stood up for us against those in the south. Then I came south and I realised that it was a lie. I remember once watching this film of Kathy Lette and Philip Adams talking to each other. Now, Kathy Lette was born on exactly the same day I was, and Philip Adams was born, goodness me, maybe 50 years before. And when they described their life to each other, I thought to myself, you know, my life in Queensland was like Philip Adams' life. It has nothing like Kathy Lette's life.
In 1970s Canberra, the student population and the political scene were a significant part of life, and radical politics was in vogue, even for those of us just starting high school.
I need blood,
There was a sense of change,
blood from the Mississippi.
and being able to walk out and see it firsthand, and know exactly which side you were on.
I need funk, funk as deep as the ocean.
The future held great promise, including the reforms of a Labor government after 25 years of Conservative rule.
Authorised M. Young, Ainslie Avenue, Canberra, for the Australian Labor Party.
But the days of a government with a social program couldn't last. Fiscal management has been the dominant theme since.
I need money, 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 money.
After the Labor Party, of course, came Marx. And why was I interested in Marx? Well, Marx offered a theory. Marx didn't just have a description of the world. Marx had a way that we could analyse and possibly understand the world we were a part of. Now, I don't think he was right anymore, but he was the first philosopher I ever read who actually gave us a theory to understand the world.
By the later 70s, groups such as Jobless Action had formed, and concession prices began to appear for the unemployed. The new Liberal government had a razor gang, and John Howard became treasurer.
From Marx, I moved into the far left, and into postmodernism, a sort of total rejection of the concept of truth, and a bit of a rejection of the concept of economic analysis. The concept of struggle became paramount in my life.
This year, Prime Minister John Howard was at Hawke's Nest for his holidays, doing the exact same things he does every annual holiday. This image of the traditional family is a favoured one, an image from the idyllic past that disguises the real intent of the present.
The triumph of the right. That's what I make of the Australian politics over the last decade. Johnny Howard and his cronies like Kim Beazley. Sort of like a joke, really, isn't it? Tweedledum and Tweedledee, except it's actually true. And the funny thing is that most people don't realise that. On the other hand, of course, it's always been thus. There's a story, you know, that in America the Republican Party actually invented the Democratic Party because there was some danger that a truly radical opposition party was going to come about. So the main governing party decided that what they'd do is they'd split half their people off and invent this other governing party, which they could then fight with. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but the way they behave is probably true. And that's what I make of Australian politics. It doesn't matter who you vote for. It's what anarchists say, you know, it doesn't matter who you vote for, you always get a politician.
Describe the event. Well, basically it's a rave. Or if you want to be politically correct about it, it's a dance party or a house party. We don't condone the use of drugs, or is that we condone the use of drugs? Well, we don't think people should be taking drugs at our party. But that's, of course, it's up to them. We usually have really good door searches and stuff. There's a lot of political stuff involved. They really got to try to keep people happy. But this is the same thing as the hippie movement in the 90s. This is all about love and happiness and enjoying yourself, and it's all about, there's no violence in this scene. This is, we're moving away from this American influence of hip hop, gangster, gun-toting sort of violence, and we're moving into an age of peace. Does that sound profound enough?
How did I get into this sort of thing? Well, I started raving about a year ago, and I went to my first rave in Sydney. That was really good. That really got me into it because at that rave they had laser effects and laser dances and the whole works. And I came about to doing this party. This is my first party as a rave promoter, and how did I come about to do it? I'm nervous from this film. Sorry. It's like good. I haven't had a chance to relax all day. I'm going non-stop.
One thing about travelling is the extra time for reading. I discovered in an American book that I was part of the Generation X grouping. Although those who like to set a date on these generations set it as beginning with those born in 1965, people born at the start of the 60s can be seen as the ones who began it all. Old enough to glimpse the 60s, but too young to participate. Then landing with Watergate and the dismissal, the post-mortem of the Vietnam War, rising unemployment.
Yeah, well, I think that whole peace and love, and it's all going to be great, and all we need to do is love each other. It was such a great, idealistic utopian thing, but kids in the 80s or who grew up in the 80s and just thought, well, where is it, you know? It's just, I think the conspiracy theory thing was really big when I was a teenager, as still is now, you know. This thing about the governments and the CIA and all of that being just so bad, so rotten to the core that there's nothing that the little person can actually do about it. So having a, you know, a utopian ideal isn't enough. And to run around a field being really happy and whatever can be great at the time, but it's not really changing anything. So I think a lot of people in the Generation X bracket may have become disheartened and negated that fact, maybe because they just don't know what ground to stand on.
Of course, there are always generations with popular names. Lost, silent, beat. The mood of the times changes, from outspoken to unspoken, from dropping out to wanting a safe career path, or just being different to your parents. Symbols of the legendary past are often revived with an ironic touch.
Here we go. This is an example of the hippie influence coming into the race scene.
Sure.
Yep. And it's all about peace and love, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yep. so there you go. That's proved it. The T-shirt proved it, didn't it?
Well, a lot of the people I know who were really into kind of hardcore music and skateboarding and all the rest of it were totally anti-techno music when it came out. Like, it was just not the thing to do. It was so uncool. You know, don't even move your feet to it, don't even show any reaction to it because it was just bad. And now they're all kind of DJs and making their own techno music instead of skateboarding. You know, it's just sort of, it's kind of, I don't know, hypocritical maybe, or they've just given up being so negative.
Though we had drawn closer to America as a result of the Vietnam War, we mostly rejected Reagan's America of the 1980s. It wasn't until later that decade that America became such a heavily dominant influence, with the computer revolution and the marketing of competitive sport. There's a deceptive simplicity about the American way of life, where you can make it if you try.
What do you want? Small coffee? Yeah, could I have another decaf latte? And what do you want?
You know, one of the funniest things about the 21st century is that people don't even know when it starts. And I think that says an awful lot about people in this generation. I mean, there is no doubt that the 21st century begins, technically, etymologically, however you like to think about it, on the 1st of January of the year 2001, and yet you can't convince people of that at all in this world. And for some reason, advertisers decided maybe they needed to make a buck quicker, maybe the budgets need to be balanced earlier, that it's going to happen in the year 2000, and everyone accepts it. Even people who know it's not true accept it. It's like the truth doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is the buck. So I'm not very hopeful for the future at all. Information, we're in an information age, and who controls the information controls the world. I don't mean who in a sort of sense of person there, I just mean corporations, I just mean entities now have an interest in information, and that information doesn't have to have any relevance whatsoever to the world. So I have no hope for the 21st century at all. Leaving aside just the fact that people are breeding too quickly, that there just won't be enough room for us all to breathe, let alone anything else. And no, I don't think people are going to look back. I think we're just going to all end up dead by the year 2050. And no one will have noticed.
One of the interesting things about the 90s with the so-called generational, which is this whole notion of generational structure is really a post-war thing anyway, and probably created out of the fact that general media began to focus on teenagers in the 50s and 60s as some sort of subculture or subgroup or whatever. But the problem you've got now with the idea of a generation in the 90s is that it's not a globalised phenomenon like it was. Well, for instance, the westernisation of what was sort of global culture in the 60s and 50s. Most of the influences were coming out of the UK and America. It'd be very difficult to say that there's any one particular thing going on now, because you just don't have those kind of cultural impetuses going on. So the notion for me of a kind of a generational style or of some fixed picture of what this generation represents, I think that'd be a falsehood to postulate something like that. I don't see how you can actually nail that down. That's for him. Thank you.
My average day consists of getting up virtually about 9 o'clock, going into town, checking out the CES, which is usually pretty hopeless. Then I usually do a lot of things for other people, go around to the op shops, try to find things which you can maybe resell as a profit. I have a bit more money than a usual person would have on the dole to survive. Then of course some other things come along, which one doesn't necessarily always want to speak openly about.
I guess want a bit of recognition, I suppose, for something like, oh yeah, that's something that I've done and completed, and you know, it's a bit of cred would be good. Yeah, I just like to work. I think that's what I want to do with my life. I think it's work, like continue to work. It's very important to me.
Information, I think that's all you can get from technology, is this enormous amounts of information, and if you've got any kind of inquiring mind, you'll try and make it as diverse as possible. It's no good using technology to just amass one form of information. With a computer, basically anybody can access any amount of information on any subject. So the broader your sense of subject is, the more likely you're going to be able to synthesize information coming from different branches or different specialty areas, and you may find a new way of utilising it, or just enjoying it, or I'm sure technology is going to allow huge developments in, say, what used to be formerly known as cottage industries, but I think people are going to actually invent their own pastimes and their own interests out of technology, and I think whole new areas of economic development will probably come out of that.
I'm on the dole, and I like to think of the dole as being a artist subsidy for what I do, because I use it to survive, and also if I've got any spare money I'll throw that into the work that I'm doing, like the original stuff that I'm doing, if I don't get funding.
At least I can use my artistic abilities.
Artistic abilities.
Well, I did that myself, one-handed. It's a bit hard with a homemade gun one-handed.
I wouldn't mind a tattoo. How much would you charge me for a tattoo like that? $50. $50? That's cheap.
Yeah.
This is Cabramatta, just with the difference that you get the deals are half as big. I don't have anything to do with it, but I'm not stupid. You just have to open up your eyes and you see.
The solution is to start looking at viable alternatives. You know, they spent
a huge committee discussing legalised distribution of the stuff. They've looked at studies from all over the world, seeing what sort of things work, but they don't want to even look at that option as viable. You know, they set up this fake committee that, 90% of the people wanted to go on with it, but because one or two didn't, they were just afraid. You know, no one wants to make the first move.
What? I just heard you can get a good feed in Canberra.
Part of the reason why, as I said before, part of the reason why drugs have become so popular among young people and older people. I mean, it's appalling how many people in their 40s are still taking heaps of drugs. It's just this whole, it just gives people a sense of belonging to, even if it's an imaginary community. I mean, it's impossible for everybody to know everybody who takes drugs. But the fact that once you become part of the drug culture, you have a sense of belonging to something much larger. In the same way that people who fought in the war belong to the RSL, they don't have to know everybody in the RSL. They merely have to go down to a club, have a few beers with a couple of their mates. But there's that sense of belonging to a greater, larger body of people and all the meanings inherent. But I think technology draws you out of that.
For me, the task of the human being is to free themselves from the forces which make them subject within the world, whether those forces are the arrangement of a classroom, the economic arrangement, political arrangements. These things make us into certain sorts of people, and to become free, we have to fight against those. Not that we ever can free ourselves, because all that we ever are is just a result of the forces operating upon us, but we can struggle against them, and that struggle is what freedom consists in, and I just don't see that struggle in the people of the 1990s.
To me, it's impossible to imagine that somebody couldn't be aware of the fact that virtually every form of information that's gone before us is now at the fingertips of the average person. There's virtually no book that you can't get hold of. There's virtually no form of visual stimulation that you can't see. Everything from the paintings of the great masters to the worst pornography that you could imagine. There's every form of activity is open to people. The person on the dole actually has the opportunity to live or have the experiences that were restricted literally to royalty and the aristocracy in the 15th century.
Perhaps the reason why people are like that today is that things have just got easier. And harder at the same time. Easier as in there is a golden hoop to shoot for, and there is a belief that you can get that golden hoop. But harder in that you have to run so hard now. It's like Alice in Wonderland. You have to run so hard just to stay in the same place that there isn't time, or at least you can easily convince yourself that there isn't time to look at the world around you. You're working so hard just to get ahead over the barriers which are put there that you never stop to look at those barriers. The adrenaline just comes up and you just keep barging ahead, climbing over the barrier after barrier. But you never step back and say, do I want to live in a world which has those barriers?
At the moment, I am motivated, but if you sort of put yourself down on a level where you say to people, yes, I'm willing to accept other things. I will do a job which, not every person would do. Like, for instance, just stacking shelves, just to make money, just as a process to make money. Like, people expect you to have fun doing a job. Like, for instance, I played the other week at Woolworths, and the woman said to me, this was a shelf stacking job, mind you, what I find attractive about the job. Now, what am I supposed to answer to that? What do I find attractive about stacking shelves with coffee, sugar, and this and that? I mean, there's no skill involved, nothing. But I couldn't say to her, I find nothing attractive about it. So I said, I find it very attractive working in a group team environment. You know, rather than just saying to her, well, I find nothing attractive about it apart from the $12 an hour, $10 an hour I might earn, you know, rather than sitting at home and just receiving the dole. Well, no, I didn't get the job because I didn't have a referee. When the referee I gave, they closed down. Which was an organisation called Jobline, which used to be funded by the government, and because the government is doing heaps of cuts lately, they cut them down. So I gave the woman a referee, which with a number and everything, which was 1 or 2 years old, and she must have called there, and they said the organisation doesn't exist anymore. So I got a letter that we're sorry to say, but we have already filled the position. Well, in other words, you know, we couldn't find anybody who would back up what you've done in the past, or this and that is true. So I did not get the job, which was a really major setback, because it's like you can't even stack shelves.
Okay, the band's Armoured Angel. We're a metal band, I guess would be the best way to describe it. You know, we try and focus on quality songwriting. For about the past 9 years there were 3 of us, Matt and Joel and myself. I'm Lucy.
As a heavily suburban community, Canberra has always had a certain type of music scene. Outside of a few pubs and clubs, youth culture dominates, spawning bands linked to defiant subcultures.
Within metal there are so many different subgenres now that it makes it so difficult, you know, to classify. I mean, you've got your folk metal, your Nordic metal, you know, heavy metal, grindcore, thrash metal, death metal.
Although these various subcultures are never as exclusive as those in bigger cities, here they intermingle.
Well, I got this microphone you see before you from Ainsley Primary School, where I remember it used to scream at me and worry the hell out of my ears. I hope it's working. And I got it because it's a legendary green bullet, and I saw a fellow who was calling himself Hurricane Hawkins and his Howling Tornadoes playing through one of these, and I thought, I got to have one of these.
I think basically heavy metal is just a rebellion against society, and I think it's sort of swept under the carpet from the mainstream because it does lash out at society and points out the faults without, you know, any holds barred. So the mainstream sort of tends to want to avoid it. But I think for metal, this has made it what it is. It's so strong, and there's a complete underground worldwide network that a band like ourselves can really utilise, whereas bands in other scenes of music, I feel, don't have that strong underground network and that link.
So, and here's my harmonica. And this is really trashed, and all the middle notes are sharp, but I love it. And I'll try and play through a few notes through this thing.
By remaining based in Canberra, Armoured Angel are very much the exception. Young musicians usually move out after making a start here, leaving the scene perpetually regenerating.
I don't know. I can only accompany people on these things. I can't play the thing for shit, but at any rate.
Yeah, what about them? Sorry?
How do you express yourself?
Oh, right. Express myself. Well, I can be very verbal, very loud, very, I can be very European about that. Speak before I think. Physically, I like to express myself. I like movement. I guess I like the animation of the body, and I like that. I'm discovering that, learning that. I suppose it's like learning one's limitations, and learning what isn't one's limitations by that. You're only limited by the way that you think.
We made one short film last year, which was a part of a cabaret-style performance that we were doing, and we filmed one scene as a silent black and white movie. It looked like Metropolis. So I'm going to make another film that's a sci-fi as well, and have a look at the 60s style of filming. We're going to do it in colour, and it should be funny, satirical, about cloning.
Stolen. A young woman took it, sir.
We usually get a big venue. Like, for example, I'll explain the one that we did at Lake Earls, which was huge. Like, it went off like a bomb in Sydney. It was fantastic. We had 52 different performers. Out of that, we had a cabaret stage downstairs, tap dancers, other people walking around in clay, strange semi-bondage acts, great bands, like cabaret-style bands, and really funny Las Vegas-style cabaret dub bands, and some techno DJs, myriad of bizarre and wonderful things. So that was a odd night. but they're always different. You can never predict what they're going to be like until they're actually happening and they kind of take on a life of their own, and they're incredibly enjoyable.
A cloning device.
A cloning device?
Where's the chip?
Bee's got it. The telling of stories. And God, I've got to take these sunnies off. I can't see. I can't. It's black under there. The telling of stories, yeah, via that eye.
Not in person? Just via
No, I've never been really good at telling stories in person. I always forget the punchline.
Hello, we're at the Canberra Festival. This is Jess, Emily and Felicity. And this is Brad, okay?
Hang on a second.
Jess, Emily, Felicity. No, we're not. We haven't been drinking vodka.
In recent times, Canberra seems to have forged some kind of relationship with Byron Bay. People go back and forth, up and down the coast. Park rangers say that there are pagan rituals in the forests, around Aboriginal stone circles and other old sites. Like Cody said, you can't pin this era down to anything specific. These people are outside the mainstream, which is not a bad place to be. But what happens if they want to move inside?
I've been looking out for jobs where you don't need much qualifications and so, but as soon as people hear that you are long-term unemployed or so, they sort of take a distance from you. They think, what have you been doing all those times? You know, and if you say, well, I've been doing the markets, you know, I've been doing a little bit of music, you know, I've been doing this and that, you know, it doesn't all fall into a category. They straight away think if you're long-term unemployed or so, you must be up to something bad, or you know, what have you been doing with your time, you know. These questions always crop up, like people don't understand that you can be unemployed but still have a lot of things which you do, like for instance, collecting, hobbies, going out with friends, talking about life and philosophy and how the world is going, that can keep you occupied too, rather than just, you know, sitting at home, staring at the walls, you know, and thinking, well, I can't change anything about my situation. I may as well just keep on staring at the walls for the rest of my life. And I sort of see myself being at a turning point, and want to consider some retraining, so to speak. Yeah, I used to, when I did my apprenticeship, we had to do technical drawings and stuff like that. So I've got a little bit of basic knowledge about drawings and stuff like that. So I think I want to go into that sort of field.
How long have you been unemployed for?
Well, much too long in my eyes, and probably in other people's eyes too, but I shouldn't worry about that too much. I'd say over 5 years now, which is quite embarrassing to anybody who will watch this.
I mean, you know, it might be palatable to be an idiot savant in some sort of ways, but I think you're much better to sort of to go for a broad, generalised knowledge living in this sort of society than you are to go for any specialised. It's not the age of specialisation was really probably the 1950s. That was when the idea of information as a sort of compartmentalisation process was sort of lauded.
So now I think I'm a postmodern ethicist. What's that? Well, what I'm concerned with is the issue of how people should live in a world in which people have no power whatsoever. I'm interested in trying to understand how the way in which the world communicates with itself, thinks about itself, turns us into a certain sort of person, makes us a certain sort of person, and I'm trying to see how one can achieve freedom within that. I'm very influenced by the philosopher Spinoza. Spinoza has a beautiful theory in which we are totally determined by the universe, and yet at the same instant we are totally free. Why are we free? Because freedom consists in getting what you want. And if you really understand the universe, then you desire what the universe gives you, so you'll get what you want, so you're free. And that I find truly beautiful.
I'll go again and have another look and see what I think, but there's not enough space over there. That's why I love Australia, because there's so much space around you. I just wish that people were more motivated, more able to stand up to things and have opinions.
Oh, it's you. Who's the snoid?
My name is Malcolm.
What is this?
If you do what I want, I won't hurt you.
Why, you perverted little...
Look, he wants the chip.
Well, I'm afraid that's not possible.
Hey, this isn't funny. Give the snoid.
My name's Malcolm.
Malcolm the chip.
I can't.
I will kill you, you know.
Not so fast, snoid.
Thank God it works.
Of course it works, you git.
That'll be beehive. Beehive.
Stop!
I mean, this is obviously my career, and I want to see if I can get into a lifestyle where I'm actually earning money, which would probably be if I got into film or something. But other than that, I can't imagine what I'd do instead. But it does worry me. I think like later in my life, like when I'm getting older, I'll be freaked out about it, because I want to have some kind of security, some kind of financial security, definitely. And it doesn't seem to be readily available now. And the current climate politically looks like there's not going to be much more money coming into, you know, my area of the arts.
No one can stop me now. Except for me.
Oh, I can't think of anything. You'll have to turn it off so I can think. I think art or artists could be seen as mental athletes. So it could be like mental athletics that you're partaking in rather than art. We could create our own art Olympics, start competing with each other, and then people might become interested.
It's often argued by Liberals, I think, and by their cronies, the Labor Party, that revolution is no longer possible, that people are now alienated from each other to such an extent that they can't act in concert. That's a pious wish of those people. The truth is, people are never alienated from each other. People are alienated from power. People are alienated from the system. alienation leads to revolution. It doesn't diminish the chances of revolution. So yes, I think it is possible that revolution will come. A rejection of the current system, a refusal to be a part, even if that's all that it takes, even if that's what it consists in, it will eventually overthrow this system. And capitalism is on its last legs. It can't survive. Thatcherism gave us a system which essentially exploits half the population in order to make the other half well off. Eventually it's going to have to exploit more than half the population, and then the very theory of democracy will overthrow it. It's what I hope and what I wish and what I think. Because people are essentially human beings, and when their humanity is sufficiently denied, they will revolt. Perhaps one at a time, but they will revolt.
Eventually, I left Canberra again. I miss the parks and the seasons, but I have to find work, and there's none here for me. Passing through Byron Bay, I met up with Ed, who has taken up the nomadic life in a psychedelic bus, with his friend Kate and her dog. Robert also left, moving to Sydney for a while, then leaving his possessions with me and vanishing. One of his friends had recently OD'd on methadone, and this seemed to have shaken him somewhat. I remembered this young kid who used to buy the records we bought, came round most nights to Robert's flat, going home late to annoy his parents. I had meant to interview him that day in Garima Place, and I thought I'd got a bit of him on tape before he wandered off to score. But I only got a brief glimpse of his coat. On a recent visit, I wandered back to Garima Place, looking forward to a cup of coffee, and found it completely changed. The big mural that I'd filmed was gone, the benches were gone, and fences were up. It was a desolate, empty place. No doubt the plan is to remodel it again, to clean it up after all those complaints of drugs and young people just hanging around. But there's always a plan like that every decade or so. Still, one day there won't be much left that I recognise.
Come along, people, listen to me. Don't try to find a home